In today's story, we uncover a silent man with a wooden bowl and a secret that left even a rich businessman speechless. No one knew his name, no one knew his past, but everyone gave him money without being asked. This is not just a story. It's a test of emotions, a twist of human behavior, and a lesson you'll never forget. Stay with us till the end, because what happens next will change how you see silence forever. Every morning, just before the sun rose over Market Street, he was already there sitting silently near the old fountain, dressed in torn clothes, his head slightly bowed. His name, no one knew. People just called him the Silent One. He never spoke. He never shouted like other beggars. He didn't shake a bowl or follow people around. He simply sat there, cross-legged, with an old wooden bowl in front of him. Strangely, people still gave him coins. Sometimes bread, sometimes fruit, and sometimes just a glance filled with sympathy. But the man remained quiet, always. Not even a thank you. Not even a nod. At first, shopkeepers thought he was mute. Children called him a statue with breath. And the drivers, honking their way through traffic, forgot he existed after the first few weeks. But a few people started noticing something odd. His face, too calm, his eyes, sharp like he was watching everything. He didn't look lost like most beggars. He looked focused, like a man playing a quiet game in a noisy world. No one dared ask him questions. They just threw coins and walked on. But behind his silence, he was counting more than money. He was watching, listening, thinking, until one day a man stopped. A man who couldn't ignore that silence any longer. And that man was rich. Very rich. But what he didn't know was he was about to be part of a trick so clever, it would change the way he saw the world forever. People walked down Market Street every single day. The street was busy, loud, and distracted. There were shops on both sides, carts selling fresh bread, and the smell of roasted peanuts floating in the air. It was the kind of street where no one really noticed anything, unless it was out of place. And that's exactly why the beggar became hard to ignore. He sat in the same spot every day, never speaking, never moving much, just holding a wooden bowl on his lap. At first glance, he looked like any poor man down on his luck, but there was something strange about him that no one could explain. His clothes were torn, but always neatly arranged. His face was dusty, but his eyes sparkled like he had a secret. Most beggars stretched their hands out, followed people, pleaded for help, but this man never did any of that. He didn't even look at people directly. Yet, somehow, coins kept landing in his bowl. Some people thought he was blind. Others believed he was a war veteran who had lost his voice. But no one ever confirmed anything. He just sat there quiet, still, and patient as if he were waiting for something far more important than money. Children would sometimes pause and stare at him, but their parents always pulled them away. Shopkeepers would gossip about him during lunch breaks. "That beggar gives me the chills," one said. "He watches people like he's reading their minds." But no one dared confront him, ask his story, or even look into his eyes for too long. It was as if the silence around him created a wall no one could break. Until one day, someone finally stopped. Not a child, not a shopkeeper, but a man with a suit, shiny shoes, and far too many questions. And that's where everything began to change. People often whispered to one another about the strange beggar on Market Street, but the question that echoed most among them was always the same: why did he never ask for money? Beggars shouted, begged, cried, and even chased people for loose change. But this man did none of that. He didn't speak, he didn't stretch out his hand, and he didn't hold up a sign. He simply sat with his bowl, day after day, without saying a word. Some said he had given up on life. Others thought he was mentally ill, and a few believed he was just too proud to beg like others. But the truth was, no one knew. And that mystery made him unforgettable. The silence around him was louder than 100 voices. People who passed him would often feel a strange pull, as if they were being watched, not in a creepy way, but in a calm, knowing way. like he understood something about them they didn't understand themselves. That quiet presence made people give without being asked. A man once dropped a 50-pound note into his bowl without even realizing it. A little girl once gave him her birthday cupcake and ran away without waiting for a thank you. His silence had a power that words couldn't reach. It made people curious. It made them feel something. And it made one particular man stop in his tracks. A man named Mr. Arthur Greaves. A wealthy businessman who believed he had seen everything life had to offer until he met the beggar who didn't beg. That moment, when Arthur paused and looked at the man for the first time, was not ordinary. It was the beginning of something none of them could have expected. A clever trick was hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. Mr. Arthur Greaves wasn't the kind of man who stopped for strangers. He had money, power, and a mind trained to calculate time like gold. Every morning, he passed through Market Street on his way to his office, eyes fixed ahead, never looking down. But one chilly Thursday morning, something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the beggar's eyes quietly followed the crowd, or the way he never flinched when the wind howled through the street. Arthur paused just a few feet away from the silent man and stared. He couldn't explain it, but something about this beggar didn't make sense. His clothes were old, yes, but not messy. His posture was still and proud, not slouched like the others Arthur had seen. The man's face held no desperation, no sadness, just a quiet focus, as if he was studying the world like a book only he could read. That intrigued Arthur more than he liked to admit. The businessman in him saw it as a puzzle, a question that refused to be ignored. He reached into his wallet and, without thinking much, dropped a 5-pound note into the beggar's bowl. The beggar didn't speak. He didn't even look up. He simply gave a soft nod, as if to say, "I expected you to do that." That nod bothered Arthur all day. It followed him into meetings and lingered in his mind during dinner. Who was this man who didn't ask yet still received? What was he hiding behind those calm, watching eyes? Arthur had built empires by reading people, but this man, this silent beggar, had him confused. And Arthur Greaves, the man who always had answers, suddenly found himself wanting more than just to give money. He wanted the truth, and he was ready to get it. The next morning, Mr. Arthur Greaves returned to Market Street with a question in his mind and a plan in his pocket. He wasn't sure why this silent beggar occupied his thoughts so deeply. But he knew one thing: there was more to this man than met the eye. Dressed in his usual gray coat, Arthur walked with purpose, the crisp 5-pound note already folded in his hand. When he reached the fountain, the beggar was there, just like every day. Sitting cross-legged, wooden bowl on his lap, eyes lowered. Arthur stood in front of him for a moment, watching. The beggar didn't look up. He didn't react. With a quiet breath, Arthur bent down and placed the 5-pound note gently into the bowl. And then he waited. But nothing happened. No thank you. No smile. No nod. The beggar didn't move a muscle, didn't lift his gaze, didn't even glance at the money. It was as if Arthur hadn't done anything at all. For the first time in years, Arthur felt invisible. He, the man who was used to being noticed, respected, and thanked, now stood before someone who acted like he didn't exist. It annoyed him at first, then it fascinated him. What kind of beggar doesn't say thank you for 5 pounds? What kind of man accepts charity with silence? As Arthur walked away, he kept turning the moment over in his head. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was rude. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something far more clever. That evening, while sipping tea in his office, Arthur stared out the window, distracted. His assistant noticed, but didn't ask. He kept thinking about that bowl, that silence, and the way it made him feel. This wasn't a normal beggar. This was someone playing a different game. Arthur had seen people fake tears, fake injuries, even fake families, to get sympathy. But this man used nothing. No words, no movements. Just a still presence and a bowl. And somehow, it worked. It worked better than any act Arthur had seen. That night, he made a decision. He wouldn't just pass by tomorrow, he would test the beggar. He would watch him, and he would find out exactly what game was being played, because now, he was sure, this wasn't just poverty. This was a performance. Arthur returned the next morning, this time without the distraction of errands or meetings. He stood across the street, arms folded, eyes fixed on the man who had now completely taken over his thoughts. Something about this beggar didn't sit right with him, not in a dangerous way, but in a deeply curious one. There was no begging, no movement, and no effort to get attention, yet people kept dropping coins into the wooden bowl. Arthur watched as a young man in a suit placed a coin without stopping. Then an old woman gave him a sandwich, followed by a teenager who handed over a chocolate bar and ran off smiling. None of them were asked. None were thanked. It was like they had all been trained, like the silence had become a silent invitation. Arthur's thoughts grew louder with each passing minute. How could a man, who said nothing, did nothing, and barely moved, make people give so much without a word? It didn't feel like an accident. It didn't feel like luck. It felt like something more, something planned, something intelligent. It felt wrong. Or maybe it felt too right to be honest. Arthur started to wonder if the man was running some hidden trick, some kind of psychological experiment. What if this wasn't a beggar at all, but an actor? Or worse, a scammer so clever that he had turned begging into an art. The more Arthur watched, the more the mystery deepened. This was not a man asking for help. This was a man doing something calculated. And in that moment, Arthur realized something chilling. This beggar wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to steady people. That smile, that silence, that bullet, was all part of something far bigger. And Arthur had just become one of his subjects. The next day, Arthur arrived earlier than usual, dressed in casual clothes, so the beggar wouldn't recognize him. This time, he didn't bring money. He brought a plan. If this man was truly running a clever trick, then Arthur, a businessman who had spent his life catching liars in suits and smiles, was going to expose it. He had asked his assistant to follow behind him at a distance, acting like a stranger. Arthur walked past the beggar, slowly and deliberately, just like the others. He paused, reached into his pocket, and pretended to hesitate. Then, instead of dropping a coin, he leaned down and placed a neatly folded note inside the bowl. It was not money, it was a message. The note said, "I'm watching you. If you can speak, meet me at the corner cafe at 6 p.m. The beggar did not flinch. He didn't even blink. Arthur straightened up, pretending nothing had happened, and continued walking. For the rest of the day, he waited. At exactly 6, Arthur sat at the corner cafe, eyes fixed on the entrance, heart oddly excited. Minutes passed. Then, out of nowhere, a man entered. He wore the same patched coat, but his walk was straighter, his face cleaner, and his eyes sharp. It was the beggar. He looked around, and, without a word, walked straight to Arthur's table and sat down across from him. Arthur didn't speak right away. He studied the man in front of him, no longer hunched, no longer weak, but calm and confident. Finally, Arthur broke the silence. "Why do you do it? You're clearly not what you pretend to be." The beggar smiled, not like someone caught, but like someone who had been waiting for this question. "People give more," he said softly, "when they believe you have nothing. But they give most, when you don't even ask." Arthur leaned in, stunned. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a strategy, psychology, a real-world social experiment, in plain sight. The beggar wasn't after money. He was after understanding human nature, and Arthur realized he had just become part of something far more intelligent than he had imagined. He wasn't the one testing the beggar. The beggar had been testing everyone all along. The next morning, Arthur stood at a distance again, but this time, something had changed. Just a few feet away from the silent beggar, another man had arrived, clearly homeless, loud, and aggressive. He was everything the silent man was not. This new beggar shouted at people, rattled a tin can. and waved his arms as though the louder he begged, the more he deserved to be heard. He yelled things like, "Please help me. And I haven't eaten in 2 days." His clothes were filthy, his voice cracked with desperation, and for a moment, Arthur thought people would surely notice him more than the man who sat in silence. But to his surprise, they didn't. In fact, people avoided him. Some crossed the street. Others gave a guilty glance and hurried past. A few shook their heads and whispered among themselves. Yet, the silent beggar remained calm, still unbothered, and one by one, people continued to drop coins, sandwiches, coffee cups, even warm scarves into his bowl. The noisy man watched with disbelief. He shouted louder, threw his hands in the air, and even accused the silent beggar of being a fake. But no one listened. Some people even glared at the loud man, as if his desperation made them uncomfortable, while the silence of the others seemed to invite trust. Arthur watched in amazement as the silent beggar, once again, won the game without ever playing it. It wasn't about pity, it was about perception. The louder beggar begged for survival, but people didn't connect with his struggle. The silent man offered nothing but mystery, and yet they gave him more than they gave anyone else. In that moment, Arthur realized something profound. People don't always give to those who need it most, they give to those who make them feel something. And the silent beggar had mastered that feeling. It was clever, not cruel, quiet, not weak, strategic, not selfish. And as Arthur stood there, he understood that this wasn't a trick about money, it was a mirror to society. One man screamed for help and was ignored. The other said nothing and was rewarded. And in that contrast, the truth about human behavior was quietly revealed. As days passed, Arthur couldn't shake one thing that haunted him more than anything else, not the silence, not the mystery, not even the cleverness of the beggar's strategy. It was his smile. That quiet, knowing smile that he gave whenever someone dropped a coin into his bowl. It wasn't a grateful smile, not the kind that said thank you or I needed this. It was something else, something deeper. It was the smile of someone who knew something others didn't, a smile of control, of confidence, of someone silently playing a game and winning. Arthur had seen that same smile before, in boardrooms, on powerful CEOs who knew they had the upper hand in a deal, but on a beggar's face, it made no sense. Or at least, not at first. Arthur began visiting Market Street more often, not as a donor, but as an observer. He watched the way people reacted to the beggar, the way their expressions changed when they met his eyes, the way their pace slowed, the way they dug into their wallets without being asked. It was almost like a silent spell being cast. And then Arthur noticed something remarkable. The beggar never smiled first. He always waited, watched, and the moment someone reached into their pocket, that's when the smile appeared, not before. That was the trick. He made people feel like their generosity had unlocked something human in him. As if their small act of kindness had brought light into his otherwise dull life. But the truth was, that smile wasn't for them, it was about them. It made them feel powerful, important, humans, and that feeling made them give more. It wasn't manipulation. It was emotional intelligence at its sharpest. The beggar didn't need words, because his smile spoke the most powerful language of all, the language of making people feel seen. Arthur sat at the cafe one evening, notebook in hand, and wrote something he would later call the smile theory. It read, "People don't give because they're asked. They give because they want to feel something in return, dignity, empathy, hope." The beggar's smile didn't thank them. It rewarded them. And in that quiet realization, Arthur knew he hadn't met just a beggar. He had met a master of human psychology, hiding in plain sight. It was a cold Friday evening when Arthur finally decided he needed to hear the truth directly from the beggar's own mouth. No more observing from a distance. No more quiet tests or assumptions. This mystery had lived in his mind for too long, and it was time to end it. He approached the man with calm determination, bent down slightly, and said softly, "I know you're not who you appear to be." For the first time in weeks, the beggar looked directly into Arthur's eyes, long, deep, and unafraid. The street noise faded. Everything slowed. And then, finally, he spoke. His voice was low, warm, and steady. "I was once a teacher," he said, "a storyteller. But people stopped listening. Everyone was in a hurry. I lost my job, my home, but not in my mind." Arthur listened in stunned silence as the man continued. "I realized something. People listen more when you say nothing. They connect more when you show them a piece of themselves. I don't beg. I reflect. I sit in silence so they can hear their own thoughts. They give because it makes them feel alive again, not because I need their money. I simply give them a reason to pause." Arthur felt something shift inside him. The beggar knew the teacher wasn't running a scam. He was teaching the world, one quiet moment at a time. His silence wasn't a trick, it was a lesson. A lesson in emotion, in empathy, in the way people crave connection in a disconnected world. Arthur nodded slowly, overwhelmed. "So you never needed the money?" The man smiled, just as he always did, and replied, "Needing money is simple. But helping people feel human again, that's priceless." And in that moment, Arthur realized the greatest trick was not deception, but truth delivered in silence. A week later, Market Street felt different. The usual noise of passing feet and distant chatter echoed around the empty spot near the fountain. The wooden bowl was gone. The beggar's place was vacant. People stopped and stared at the patch of pavement where he had once sat every day without fail. Arthur arrived too, almost running. He had come to speak with the man again, to thank him properly, maybe even help him rebuild a new life. But it was too late. The teacher in disguise had vanished. In his place, carefully taped to the side of the fountain, was a folded piece of paper. A single note. Arthur recognized the handwriting immediately, elegant, sharp, and thoughtful. He took it down gently and unfolded it as a small crowd gathered, curious and silent. The message read, "I came here not for coins, but to remind people they still have the power to give. In a world full of noise, I chose silence. In a city full of hurry, I chose stillness. If you gave me something, know this: I did not take your money. I gave you a moment of yourself." Below it, there was a list of local charities, shelters, and food banks. At the very bottom, it simply said, "Pass it forward." That is all I ever wanted. The street fell silent. Some people wept quietly. Others stood frozen, holding their coffee cups and shopping bags, suddenly aware of how blind they had been. Arthur folded the note slowly, a strange pride swelling in his chest. The man they had once thought a beggar had given them something no one else could: a pause, a mirror, a reason to feel again. And in that quiet message, left on an ordinary fountain, the teacher's final lesson echoed louder than words ever could. Weeks passed, and yet the memory of the silent beggar refused to fade. His absence spoke louder than his presence ever had, and Market Street was no longer the same. People still walked by the fountain, often slowing down, pausing, looking for that wooden bowl, half hoping they'd see him again. Arthur, now deeply changed, found himself sharing the man's story at meetings, at dinner tables, and even in business seminars, not as a tale of poverty, but as a lesson in human depth. Rumors began to spread. Some said the man was once a professor who lost everything but kept his wisdom. Others believed he was a millionaire testing how generosity works in a world obsessed with noise and need. A few even claimed he was sent by someone hired to teach without speaking. But Arthur knew the truth. He wasn't poor, not in the way most people think. He may not have owned a house, or fancy clothes, or a full bank account, but he had something far rarer: understanding. He understood people better than most psychologists, spoke less than most teachers, and gave more than most wealthy men. His silence had become a mirror, and his smile, a silent revolution. The coins in his bowl were never his goal. The real treasure was what he left behind: a city that now looked at beggars differently, listened more carefully, and gave more thoughtfully. In the end, no one ever saw him again. But Market Street remembered. And every now and then, someone would leave a coin by the fountain, not for the man, but for the lesson. Because he wasn't just a beggar, he was the wisest man in town, dressed in rags, holding up a silent sign that no one could see but everyone could feel. Sometimes, the richest souls wore the poorest clothes.